let's go to our next caller here, and this is Jared on the computer. Hello, Jared. You are up next. Thank you for being patient.
All right, appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no worries.
So this hand was a 5-10. It's interesting following up Squish with his bluffing or his thoughts on bluffing because I really want to get your thoughts on this, whether I was just lighting money on fire or whether this bluff could ultimately be profitable. So this was a Bellagio 5-10, 8-handed. It's probably 3 weeks ago that I was down there playing, and I was sitting at about 1,600 effective.
This is a 1500 restricted buy-in game, right? Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, it's
Okay.
1,500 cap.
Yeah.
At this point, the guy that I was in the hand with had a little bit more than me, and I was about 1,600
Okay.
at this point.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
so the action starts up button. It folds all the way around to the button, who's going to be the villain in this hand. So button opens up to 30, which is pretty standard open for the game. And I'm in the small blind with King of Hearts and Queen of Spades.
Okay.
And I decide to raise this hand up. So I feel like that was the right move. I feel like he could be very wide, especially playing out of the button with what he's opening with. And I felt like, especially with King Queen being off suited, probably either way, King Queen suited or King Queen off, I would raise this up. But I went ahead and a little over 3x'd it to 110. Big blind folds, and then the button called.
Okay. I mean, just one thing. I mean, we should prefer to 3-bet the King Queen suited, but I mean, in this particular situation, obviously 3-betting either one. This is not an anti-game. I don't even know the last time I've just played a 2 straight blind game, which is kind of funny because in Texas, we're always playing multiple straddles where you're pretty much always incentivized to 3-bet out of the small blind. But I mean, this is late versus
Right.
small blind. So button calls. Okay, so pot's like maybe 225, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so button calls. Flop comes out 6 of spades, 3 of clubs, and then 3 of spades.
So 6 of spades, 3 of clubs, 3 of spades. So front door spades, you've got king, queen off. Now, I will say that the button should have a fair amount of just a volume of hands here. You made it just under 4x, but if the button is opening, say 35, 40% of hands, and he's going to defend with, say, 40 to 50% of that opening range, you are going to see a much larger volume of hands than if you were, say, 3-betting like the under the gun opener. With that being said, though, it's still hard for him to really hit this board all that much and to hold on. I mean, really the only threes, king 3 suited is probably not going to be defended here. Shouldn't be. You have a king in your hand, so it's really like a lot of ace 3 suited or like 6s full is really the only things that are going to hit him. Obviously, he can call with some ace highs and stuff, but you've got a pretty good dynamic board to fire multiple barrels. One of the other things, though, too, is that I don't know about the strength of this player. Another thing a lot of recreational players don't realize is that sort of the whole concept of MDF and how they might get at the end with hands they're supposed to call with, but they just don't because of absolute hand strength because the pot is big, and you can exploit them sometimes like that. But okay, so 6-3-3.
And you did mention that MDF in the response that you gave back to my email last week. And I did think about that just as the hand progressed, like if that came into play, because I do think this was a good player. He was a younger kid. He felt comfortable. He knew the dealers. Like I feel like he was a good player. But I guess who knows? So I for all those reasons you said, I did decide to c-bet. I down betted a little bit. I c-betted to about $100. It was exactly 100. So just a little over a third.
Okay.
And then he thought about it for a second. I mean, it wasn't a snap call, but he thought about it, and then he put in the call.
Yeah, this is an interesting board because I bet you actually can go quite large here too. Now, obviously, like if you want to simplify your strategy, when you go, say, 1/3, you can do it with a ton of different hands. But you can also, on these low boards, I've seen a larger size reflected too, where you just have a lot of the, where it's just really not going to hit anybody, and you have a lot of the overpair types of things. With that being said, you can sort of put the hammer down on turn and river. If you start sizing large and you're not deep, you will sometimes run out of stack depth too. So you go 100 button calls, pot's 425.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so turn is the 8 of hearts. It shouldn't change a whole lot, in my opinion. I mean, potentially if he was floating me, with like 8-7 or something, which I don't know why he would, but like 8-7 of spades or something like that, which certainly could be in his range. This could obviously hit him now at this point. He could have pocket eights as well. But I still felt like, obviously it didn't straighten it out. It didn't put a straight out there. It didn't put a flush out there. So I continued to barrel. So I bet 280. And then he called.
So you bet 280. I was going to say that's probably like a 2/3 type sizing here on the turn. And your bet probably should get a fair amount of ace highs to fold out unless they have something else going on here. I mean, maybe ace king, ace queen might continue, but some of the worst ace highs, it's really hard for them to pick up anything here now too. I mean, if he had a backdoor club, that's out. If he had a spade in his hand, that's out now too. So you bet 280 and button calls again.
Correct. And I also felt like, Bart, maybe that's why I'd love your thoughts on this. I also felt like if he had played something like an ace three, or even like 4-3, which potentially if he was kind of wide, he could be playing out of the button with my raise. I feel like with the board disconnected, I probably would have heard from him. I think he would have raised me either the river or the flop, or the turn. I don't know. And maybe, so I was starting to rule out that he had a 3.
I don't know about,
I guess is my thinking.
I don't know about that though. I don't know about that because you've put in like 1/3 of your stat, or you've probably got about 1100 left. I mean, if I flop something big here, especially if it's a very wide configuration, like I've got 6s full or I turn 8s full, I know that this is a good board for you to barrel off, and you only have a pot size bet left, so I don't need to build here. So I would allow you to try to barrel off, with some overcards or represent a high card that comes at the end, or if you're a good player, sometimes effectively value bet if you were to hit a king or a queen here at the end. So if I had a 3, if I had 6s full and 8s full, and I'm all for fast playing, but I don't think that this would be good versus good player here in this wide configuration. I wouldn't be doing a whole lot of raising here in position. There's no need to. You're not really all that deep, right? You're left with about 1 SPR here, right at the end.
Right.
So
that's good thought.
Yeah. So pots looks like it's about 985. All right, let's go to the river here.
Okay, so river comes out an interesting card. And this is where, again, I don't know if this helped me or hurt me. So the river is the 3 of diamonds. Well, so obviously any pair now we've got a flush. 3's full.
Right. I mean, this is sort of a game of chicken here now too, like in this, and this is why I said this comes down to MDF here in this hand, which is minimum defense frequency for those people that aren't necessarily familiar with it. What I was saying is that there is something to be said for a lot of recreational players not necessarily identifying a wide spot where you might have a lot of hands and where they might be forced to call down with a hand like pocket 7s, something like that in a given scenario, because it might be one of the better hands that they're going to arrive with at the end. Pocket 9s, pocket 10s, you might see some overfolds. There's an old school theorem too called the Zebo theorem. This is probably from 15, 20 years ago, that says that nobody ever folds a full house. So you're not going to get somebody to fold like, ace 8 of clubs, pocket 9s, pocket 10s. Where I think that this one's really interesting, Jared, and I might touch on this on the regular podcast here too. And again, it's something that a lot of, I would say, computer top players might not necessarily recognize. I feel like this might be a mixed spot where sometimes, and I'm not even talking about the specific combinations, but sometimes you move all in as a bluff, sometimes you check, and I think how you find that mix isn't necessarily using like a randomizer. It's how your image is in the session. And what I mean by that is not looseness or tightness. I'm talking about if you're winning or losing. So I remember way back in the day, in these epic sessions at Commerce 510, and I've done several 500-hour challenges where I recorded every hand and I put my, results up on the website. This would be a situation where if I was up a shit ton in a restricted cap game and I could run over the table because people saw I was winning, that's how I would randomize. I'd go for it. Whereas if I had a shitty image and I was losing, and people might actually wrongly think that I was tilting, they're going to call me down more often. Now that's without even I'm saying that without even just not even considering our cards. I'm just saying this situation, not even considering our cards. Now, with our cards here, if you thought that the button would obviously, four bet off a fair amount of queens, kings, aces, ace, king, things like that, you block a lot of those hands. So, in reality, you might be seeing some jacks, tens, nines, something like that, some sort of call with, an eight, maybe even a small pair like fours or, fives that we're holding on to the end. So you probably have a fair, you do have some good, I would say. I mean, I think I said this in the email too. I would almost rather have Jack 10 here if I were you. I would rather have Jack 10 here and block jacks and tens, or like a 10 or a 9 in my hand, if I assumed that the opponent was going to be four betting kings, queens, aces, something like that. So I actually think that having like one of these sort of hands that block the top part of a range that's not four bet off, that is like a raise call, just a call to the three bet, is slightly better. If we really were to dig into the weeds, I still think it is kind of an image dependent thing. So you have about 380. Yeah, you've got about a pot size bet left, right?
A little over a pot. Yeah, it's like almost a pot, just a little over.
So what ended up happening here?
So, I mean, I thought about, completely honest, I didn't think about the MDF like perspective of this and like what he might have to call if he was a thinking player. I did think just about how the hand had went. And I definitely was repping. I mean, if the two of us, I had the overpair advantage, where I could have had a much higher pair, I think, than he could. And so I ended up moving all in. I didn't think about it like, for super long. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I think there is some tells with waiting too long, like as you're analyzing whether you go on. I think if somebody waits for a long time, in my experience with cash playing, that can almost be a tell of weakness. But so, I mean, I didn't take a long time, but I did move all in on him. And then he thought about it. Like, it wasn't a snap call. It wasn't a snap fold. He sat and thought about it for probably, I don't know, 30, 40 seconds. So again, it wasn't like an extremely long tank on his part, but he did think. He ended up flipping in the chip. I of course say good call because I know he's got me. And I was surprised. He rolled over pocket fives, black fives.
Yeah. Button calls with 5-5.
Which again, when I saw what he rolled over, I was surprised because that's exactly what I was hoping he had, was some sort of a lower pair. Obviously, ace high would be better here, but I don't think he would have gotten to this point with ace high.
Yeah, it's interesting to
potentially, unless it was suited.
If you're going all in for a pot size bet, which means that he's to sort of make your bluff indifferent, he would need to call with the top 66% of hands that he gets here with, right? Which is, a fair amount, right? Because, you're risking a pot size bet, so you got to be right like 33% of the time. But when you do this out, it's what do I arrive with here at the end? Is 5-5 in the top 66% of all combos? You'd have to play out, what is he calling, flop across turn with. If he is calling with a fair amount of ace highs, I suppose it could be. It seems on the surface a little bit on the lower side of all hands that he arrives here with. I'd have to really look into the combo work. But again, I think that this is a function of image and also a function of where your opponent or what your opponent perceives of you. It sounds like maybe it was early on in the session or you hadn't necessarily established an image. And I think sometimes you're going to get through a recreational player more than maybe like a winning player at a spot like this, because a winning player is going to sort of understand the math and understand the given dynamic.
I'd agree. Yeah, and I think that once I saw what he called with, that's why I sent it into you, because I was just, I don't know that this is a profitable bluff, to your point, unless you have like an image, kind of that meta thing happening. If a thinking player, if this is a decent call with pocket fives, I'm not sure that this is a winning bluff. And I don't know.
By the way, I think I said top 60. I'm sorry, I said top 66%. I meant top 50%. Excuse me, because thank you for someone pointing that out in the chat. I was confusing the pot odds with MDF, right? Because you're betting pot, so your bluffs have to get through.
Yeah,
50%.
It's just about it's like $100 over pot. But yeah,
so
pot.
So it's like it's. Does 5-5 like fall into the top 50%? You'd have to run down the line, right? You have to run down the line. And then, of course, though, you have these blocking properties. Like if he has like ace, king, or ace, queen, and he thinks you're only going for value, like in a spot like, and he blocks some of this value that you would take, you have that to consider, to take into consideration as well. Jared, thanks for the call. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.